Hey everybody, welcome to the Root Will Homeschool channel. Today is the third reading in my study guide series for Plutarch's Life of Cato the Younger. And today we see him enter into military service. Plutarch writes, when he considered that he was ripe for marriage without ever having to do with any women, he betrothed Lepida, who had before been promised in marriage to Cæpio Metellus, but at that time was disengaged, for Cæpio had repudiated her, and the betrothment was cancelled. However, before the marriage, Cæpio again changed his mind, and by using every exertion got the maid. Cato, who was greatly irritated and stung, made preparation to prosecute the matter in legal form, but on his friends preventing him, in his passion and youthful fervor he betook himself to iambic verses, and vented much injurious language upon Cæpio, employing the bitterness of Archilochus, but dropping his ungoverned license in childish manner. He married Atilia, the daughter of Soranus, and this was the first woman with whom he came together, but not the only woman, like Laelius, the companion of Cæpio. For Laelius was more fortunate in having known during his long life only one woman, and that his wife. When the Servile War was on foot, which they called the War of Spartacus, Gellius was commander, but Cato joined the service as a volunteer for his brother's sake, for his brother Cæpio was a tribune. He had not indeed the opportunity of displaying as much as he wished his zeal and his discipline in virtue, owing to the war being ill conducted, but notwithstanding this, by showing in contrast to the great daintiness and luxury of those who were engaged in that campaign, orderly behavior and bravery when it was required, and courage and prudence in all things, he was considered in no degree to fall short of the old Cato. Gellius assigned to him special distinctions and honors, which Cato would not take nor allow, saying that he had done nothing worthy of honor. In consequence of this, he was considered a strange kind of fellow. And when a law was made that those who were candidates for an office should not be accompanied by nomenclators, he was the only person, when a candidate for a tribuneship, who observed the law, and having himself made it his business to salute and address those whom he met with, he did not escape censure even from those who praised him, for the more they perceived the honorable nature of his conduct, the more they were annoyed at the difficulty of imitating it. Upon being appointed a tribune, he was sent to Macedonia to Rubrius the praetor. On that occasion, it is told that his wife, being troubled and shedding tears, one of the friends of Cato, Munatius, said, "Atilia, be of good cheer. I will take care of him for you." "It shall be so," replied Cato. After they had advanced one day's journey, he said immediately after supper, "Come, Munatius, and keep your promise to Atilia by not separating yourself from me either by day or by night." Upon this he ordered 2 beds to be placed in the same chamber, and Munatius always slept thus, being watched in jest by Cato. There accompanied him 15 slaves, and so you see Cato does have kind of a sense of humor, if you were wondering. There accompanied him 15 slaves and 2 freedmen and 4 friends, and while they rode on horseback, Cato himself always went on foot, keeping by the side of each of them in turns and talking with them. When he arrived at the camp, where there were several legions, being appointed to the command of one legion by the general, he considered the display of his own merit, being only one thing, as a small matter and nothing kingly, but being chiefly ambitious to make those who were under him like himself, he did not deprive his power of its terrors, but he added to it reason, by means of which persuading and instructing his men about everything, honor and punishment following. Whether he made his soldiers more peaceable or warlike, or more full of zeal or just, it's difficult to say. So formidable did they become to the enemy, and gentle to the allies, and so little disposed to do wrong, and so ambitious of praise. But that which Cato cared least for he had the most of, both good opinion and popularity, and honor above measure, and affection from the soldiers. For by voluntarily laboring at that which he imposed on others, and in his dress and way of living and marching on foot, making himself like them rather than the commander, and in his morals and his noble bearing, and in eloquence surpassing all who were entitled imperators and generals, by such means he imperceptibly produced in the men at the same time goodwill towards himself. For no true emulation after virtue is bred except from perfect goodwill and respect towards him who commends it. But those who, having no love, praise the brave, respect their character, though they admire though they admire not their virtue, nor do they imitate it. Hearing that Athenodorus, named Cordelian, who had great skill in the Stoic philosophy, was living at Pergamus, being now an old man and having most resolutely resisted all intimacy and friendship with governors and kings, Cato thought that he should get nothing by sending and writing to him, but as he had a furlough of 2 months allowed by the law, he made a voyage to Asia to the man, in the confidence that, though through his own merits, he should not fail in the chase. After discoursing with Athenodorus and getting the victory over him and drawing him from his settled purpose, he returned with him to the camp, overjoyed and greatly elated at having made the noblest capture, and got a more splendid booty than the nations and the kingdoms which Pompeius at that time and Lucullus were subduing in their campaigns. While Cato was still engaged in the service, his brother, who was on his road to Asia, fell sick at Inus in Thrace, and a letter immediately came to Cato. And though the sea was very stormy, and though no vessel at hand of sufficient size, taking only 2 friends with him and 3 slaves, he set sail from Thessalonica in a small trading ship. After narrowly escaping being drowned at sea, he was saved by unexpected good luck, but he found Cæpio already dead. He was considered to have borne the misfortune with more of passion than philosophy, not only in his lamentations and his embracings of the dead body and the heaviness of his grief, but also in his expenditure about the interment, about the funeral expenses. The interment, and the trouble that he took about fragrant spices and costly vests which were burnt with the body, and a monument of polished Thracian stone of the cost of 8 talents, which was constructed in the agora of Inus. These things there were some who found fault with, by comparison with Cato's freedom from all display in other matters, not seeing how much mildness and affection there was in the man, who was inflexible and firm against pleasures and fears and shameless entreaties. For the celebration of the funeral, both cities and princes offered to send him many things to do honor to the dead. From none of whom, however, would he receive valuables, but he accepted fragrant spices and vests, paying the price to those who sent the things. Though the succession came to him and the young daughter of Cæpio, he did not claim back in the division of the property anything that he expended on the funeral. And though he did such things as these and continued to do such, there was one who wrote that he passed the ashes of the dead through a sieve and sifted them to search for the gold that was burnt. So far did the writer allow not only his sword, but also his stylus, irresponsibility, and exemption from all account. All right, so that's the reading. If you want to, now you could pause the video and narrate. I don't always tell you this, but this is always an option for you if you want to practice narration. If you don't know what narration is, I'll put a link to a video describing narration, and also have a description of narration in the beginning of all the study guides. So anyway, that's the reading. Also, if you have any questions, you can ask me those in the comment section. But after every reading, as I said, we'll look at these questions. And the first question I have is, what was Cato like as a soldier and an officer? So that's really the first part of this section. You have Cato, the soldier, being described. And he really stands out as his virtue makes him stand out in a way that shames even the everybody else, the other officers who are in charge. This Plutarch describes them as being very dainty and luxurious. So they're all worried about how they look and that they're scented right and that they've got just the right this or that, and they're soft. The way he's describing the leaders are soft, and they're not really concerned about getting down there with the soldiers and doing the business of being a soldier. Cato, however, does. It says he walks with the he marches with the soldiers. He does whatever labor he asks them to do. He does himself, so he doesn't keep himself apart from them. This is kind of interesting too. It says, so he distinguished himself with bravery and courage and prudence, which are 2 of the official cardinal virtues. And so at some point, Gellius, the commander, assigned to him special distinctions and honors, which Cato would not take or allow. It says that, and this in consequence of this, he was considered a strange kind of fellow. So I think what that means is, people are like, well, you just, did something really brave, and typically you would get a medal for that or some sort of honor. But he wouldn't accept it. And I think that his thinking was, I'm a soldier. Why? That's what I'm supposed to do. So why would I be honored for doing what I'm supposed to do? So it's kind of an interesting mindset that he had. This is also kind of a nice little insight again into his character. You may not have followed this because you might not have known what a nomenclator is, but it says here, when a law was made that those who were candidates for an office should not be accompanied by nomenclators, he was the only person, that observed this law. So a nomenclator is the guy who would walk around with, let's say you're running for political office, and you had a nomenclator with you. The nomenclator was the guy who made it his business to memorize everybody's name that's you could run across in the course of a day. So let's say you see somebody walking up to you and you don't know who they are. You could just go to the nomenclator. Hey, who's this guy coming up towards us? And he would say, oh, that's, Tom or whatever. So Tom, it's been so long since I've seen you. So it gives the guy who's running for political office, it gives the illusion that he cares about the person he's talking about enough to know his name, when in fact he just had this guy over here whose whole business it is to remember names. So there was a law that was passed, all right, you can't use these people anymore. Cato is the only guy who observed the law, so he did not have one of those people, which means he did personally memorize everybody's name. He actually knew everybody by name. And this made people jealous because I guess they weren't willing to do the work to actually do that. But so anyway, this is a common theme with Cato, that he is admired by people for his virtue, but also he makes them feel bad because he's so virtuous that they see how far they are from the mark. There was one other thing that I thought was really a continuation of a theme we've seen in Cato so far. It says when he was over these soldiers, it says here, he did not deprive his power of its terrors. So he's an officer. He has the authority to punish his soldiers. So he didn't waive that authority. He kept it. It was there. It was still a real possibility. But, it says, he added to it reason, by means of which persuading and instructing his men about everything, honor and punishment following. So he didn't just say, dig me a hole or do this or do that and just bully them into doing it. They knew, of course, that they could be punished, but he explained the why behind it. And that seems to have been really appreciated and made him a much more effective leader. Also, do you remember from the first reading, this is a part of his personality where it says, they say that this is talking about Cato when he was a lad. So they say that Cato was obedient to his teacher and did everything he was bid, but he would always ask the reason of everything and inquire the why. So this is really important to Cato. He treats his soldiers just like he would want to be treated. He doesn't just say, do this, do that, obey me. They do have to obey him, but he tells them the why of it. So I thought that was a cool, reappearance of that same idea in him as a grown-up person. So anyway, he was a great soldier, and he was well respected by the men for his virtue. He really inspired loyalty in his men for that reason. So that's him as a soldier. Now let's look at the second question. The question is sort of, if you remember this, you'll know why I'm telling you this, but I say, go back and read to the first reading and write down Cato's answer to this question: whom do you love the most? So if you haven't seen the first reading, I'll put a link to it up there, but if you remember, do you remember this question? Do you remember what the answer to the question in the first reading was? The question was, it says, when he was a little boy and some persons asked him whom he loved the most, he replied, his brother. When he was asked whom he loved next, he gave the same answer, his brother. and so on to the third question until the questioner was tired out by always getting the same answer. So that just lets you know early on, as the very first reading, Cato loves Cæpio, his brother, more than any other human being on earth. And Cæpio has died. So this is, I think you can see in this reading, there's lots of interesting things going on in this reading. On the one hand, you might think, if you only thought about Cato, how moral he was and how inflexible, like he doesn't matter whether you threaten him um, or tempt him, he's unmovable. But in this reading, you get to see that he did have a soft side to him. In fact, let's go back to the first reading so we can see the contrast here. So it says here in the first reading, he was also difficult to move to laughter, and his countenance was seldom relaxed even into a smile. Now, if that's all you knew about him, you might think he was kind of a rigid, not funny kind of person. But in this one, and you'll see this later on in the life, but in this one, he's making a joke with his friend Munatius. So he's a funny guy. He has a sense of humor, but so you need to be reminded of that with all this other stuff. The other thing that I think we should keep in mind is he's really devoted to this Stoic philosophy. We talked about that earlier, but Stoicism was a philosophy in ancient Greece that said you should try to govern your life by reason. So don't just let your passions just fling you all over the place, your emotions and your passions. You should be it doesn't say you shouldn't have them, obviously, but you should be in control of your actions and use reason and philosophy to guide yourself in a moral way and not be jerked around by your anger or lust or anything else, or grief or anything else. So it's interesting, the irony of this passage is that he goes to all this effort to also, it's ironic that this reading opens up with him being really not very stoic about losing this engagement here earlier. He's really bitter about that. So he's human, obviously. But right after he goes to all this trouble to study with the Stoic philosopher, right after Plutarch tells us that, we learn about the death of Cæpio. And he loved Cæpio so much. That's what this line means. He was considered to have borne the misfortune with more of passion than philosophy. So the Stoicism, he's not really thinking about that right now. He's giving way to the emotion. This surprised a lot of people, but Plutarch says this about it, and I think this is really touching. He says these things there were some who found fault with, by comparison with Cato's freedom from all display in other matters, not seeing. So he's like, Cato seems like he's so solid and rigid. Why is he just completely melted down by the death of his brother? But Plutarch says this: these people didn't see how much mildness and affection there was in the man, who was inflexible and firm against pleasures and fears and shameless entreaties. So we find out Cato is really only firm and inflexible and severe like this in the face of people trying to push him one way or other through pleasure or fear or shameless entreaties. But when it comes to those he loves, like Cæpio, he says he had a great deal of mildness and affection in him. So this is just another thing I think that makes Cato so likable. His love is deep, but also his as seen by his display of emotion at the death of his brother, which obviously God gave us emotions for a reason, and he lets them flow at that point. but he does not let his emotions or his passions or anything else take him off in places where he shouldn't be. Also, I thought it was kind of cool that he was so extravagant with this funeral for his brother to display just how much he loved him, but he didn't take any of that out. It was all, he wanted to make sure that the cost of that was all his own, as if it were kind of a gift to him. So I thought that was very touching. That's all I got for this one. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.